Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Oregon State University Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the winter and spring 2023 class, and this is our second office hour. Great to see so many faces. Really appreciate that, and great to see so many questions. I forecast we're probably going to run 10 or 15 minutes over, so if you do need to run, go for it. No problems. But there's a lot of questions today, some of which I've answered in tutorials and whatnot, and I'll point people in those directions as well. But I think we'll jump right into it. First and foremost, thanks to everybody for your patience. I had to come home and deal with 24 inches of water in my basement that was potentially there for a very long time. So we've been working for like 12 and 14-hour days, coming home and marking 2 or 3 assignments, and it's definitely not the way I usually roll. So I really want to thank everyone for your patience, because it's been, if I look tired, I am. We'll just say that. Great. So let's jump into the Q&A, and we got Julius with a number of really good questions. So I'm just going to change the view here. Cool. So Julius, I'm using a deep blue for my slides. Unfortunately, now the small text in the top left corner won't appear on these slides as the blue covers it. I've already tried to put it in the foreground. I've tried a few things and I want to ask for your help. Here you go. So Julius, I did see this question early, which is great. There's no way to do it. As far as I understand, we tried this a bunch a couple years ago when I developed the template. And basically what it is that when you go into the background of the template, so we can do this here just to show you the issues of the software. So if we go into edit theme, basically you can think of the theme as everything on the bottom layer of your slides. And so this insert your name, etc. up here that you all change when you start the program is actually at the bottom of the slide. And so the only way to see it through the slides, and this is the new formatting of the template. So I think we removed that full color block for just that reason in the new template. So yeah, unless you create some opacity to it, there is no way to see through it. Sorry about that. It's just the way the software is set up.
Alrighty. So, but it's definitely necessary. So I'll have to figure out a way how to either not have something in front or have it more transparent.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you were one of the people who ended up with the old template. So unbeknownst to me and very frustratingly to me, in the assignment 1 discussion board that everyone has access to, there was 2 links to the OSU PDC template. And for some reason, they had somebody external to the program come in and do a little bit of editing. And for some reason, they ended up copy and pasting the old template. So you actually are on the old template. If you end up moving to the new template, the number of those issues will be solved, actually.
Okay, I was gonna do that. I'm not sure yet if that means I think there's a different type of it's different there for the personal survey, and I'm not sure if I'll if I don't know how much work it is to transfer it to that one, but I'll figure that out.
Yeah, so basically what I would do is I would make a copy of the new template and then just take slides 1 through 1 through 11, and then just copy and then paste it onto the new template. And if you want to switch some of these slides for the new stuff, great. And if you want to just keep this and move forward, that would be fine as well.
All right.
Yeah. And just make sure in the theme that you expand this block, because the block here, if you go into the edit theme and pull it, then it'll be on one line. It'll help with your formatting as you go forward.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. For the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'm preparing to move to another country. Portugal, while working more than full-time in construction. I did not expect it when I enrolled the program. However, from mid-Feb on, I will have 2 days per week that I can dedicate to course. My question is, what would you recommend to those who know they will fall behind for some time? I guess it's still best to stay in continuity and work from assignment to assignment. Yeah, so couple of thoughts here. I'm just going to go to your slide and see if I get a sense of the design site. And maybe you haven't gotten there yet. Yeah, probably not. Oh, okay. Ellis, I'll just ask you to mute yourself. Thank you. So a couple of things. One, I might shrink the property that you're going to design if you know it's going to be you're not going to have as much time. So generally, I recommend everybody work on the smallest size that they can, because it'll make the education experience more rich, and it will make your life easier because you won't have to work on so much. So first, I'd recommend on shrinking the size of it, and then second, really focus on the bare minimum. You know, if there's extra pieces to be in, to be placed in, or if there's an optional, take that off the table, and then you know, just do the bare minimum. And I'll comment on issues with formatting, but if you're feeling like you're spending a lot of time moving boxes around, don't worry about it. Just leave it messy, knowing that you'll come back to it. So that can shave off like 10 to 40% of your time. And really just focus on, you know, the mentality of this work, because it doesn't matter. This template doesn't matter. You know, as much as I like it and love it, and it's great for those that are working full-time in design, and I've had colleagues start to use this template, the template, the digitization of it doesn't matter. So as long as you can communicate the assignment gist, like if you can tell me exactly what's going on with your soils and the conversation there, if you can shave time off of the digitization of that, feel free to. And then there's a couple of options. One, you can just consider that you are going to re-enroll for the next available course. And it's not 3 months in advance, because we basically roll every it's not 20 weeks in advance, it's 10 weeks. So every 10 weeks, we're starting a new course. And so you may want to think about re-enrolling in the next course. And there's a small fee, or generally, if you can give a reasonable request to the powers that be at OSU, they'll be okay with you re-enrolling. So you could do that, or you could decide you're just not going to get the certificate and you're just going to have access to the materials, because you have access to the materials forever.
It's not an option.
So that's an option as well.
No. Well, it's just the next, 2 to 3 weeks that I'm kind of short, but afterwards I can fully
Okay.
I can dig in. So I think I'm definitely gonna stay in, and but our property is really big, so I'm wondering if it, and we have many projects going on there. So is there any chance I could get in touch with you concerning that decision?
Yep.
How would I do that?
Just feel free to send me an email.
All right. Yeah, it's a pity I haven't got any pictures on there yet, so you could see, but yeah. All right. So I guess I will just stick it out until I have the time, and then I'll just try to catch up, and maybe focus on the most important, and then maybe fill in some more details later on. Because
and
I do
anything
want to
that's
do it.
feeling like it's too much, just put in, didn't have enough time, we'll come to this later. Like generally, if there's an issue, just put a caveat on the slide, and that way I know, okay, this is a space holder, and you know that I know that it needs to be filled out, and then you're going to come back to it.
Like for example, I won't be on the property for another few weeks, just so if I find that the photos I have right now are not sufficient, then that's just gonna be put off, and should I still submit then, or should I wait until it's completed to submit?
If it's like 10 or 15% is incomplete, feel free to submit the assignment, but especially if there's full assignments that are missing. I had a couple of folks during this first week submit like one assignment or two or 1.5, and really you want to have all the assignments complete before you submit. But if it's like 10% or 15%, that's fine.
Right. Right. Thanks for
Awesome.
that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And yeah, in terms of late submission, you can submit up to 2 weeks late. After that, you may not get as detailed feedback, but that there's no penalty. My main request to everyone is please don't give me 7 assignments the last week. It's a huge amount to have to deal with. Technically, you're allowed, and technically it's permissible, but please don't. And I think this kind of goes into the same conversation. It's be conscientious about taking a small area and just doing exactly what you need to do and then working on with that. So great questions. Okay, Robin. I think Robin's even on the call. I think I just saw them pop in. Oh, they're there. Great. Let's talk about one of my favorite subjects. How do you incorporate GIS, geographical information services or systems data into their designs? Yeah, do it all the time. So there's a couple ways I do this. One, depending where you are in the world, there tends to be data sets of different subject matter available publicly. So in Canada, there's an entire hydrological data set I found years ago that basically details all the courses of waterways, wetlands, things of that nature. And it's a data set that I can access via Google Earth Pro, the desktop edition. And I can download the different sections. Same thing with something called the BC Soil Sift data set. So I can download certain sections of the BC Soil data set and bring it into my design, into Google Earth Pro, and then I can use that. And this is the case for a lot of North America, a little bit of Europe, a little bit of Australia. More and more, there's more data sets being made available. It's amazing how much data is behind closed doors and paywalls and things of that nature. The UN has a couple of different elements of data sets. And while that isn't the focus of this course, it's something that I do quite a bit. So generally, when I'm taking a look at a new design in a new country, I was taking a look at a 6,500 hectare farm in Uganda. I was looking at the different data sets that were available for Uganda through the Ugandan government and then through the UN. And then there was a conservation organization I found that had a couple of different data sets that I could bring in to Google Earth Pro. Years ago, I spent a little bit of time learning QGIS, and I know how to use it. Generally, it's got a number of different processes and point orders that I was just not remembering. So I ended up giving that up to a subcontractor. Funny enough, the subcontractor who taught my GIS course, my QGIS course, and they then became one of my main contractors. And now I have another contractor I'm working with, Ryan Anderson, who, if folks are interested, I'm happy to give his contact information to. And then the first contractor, Brent Smith from Paper Street Permaculture. And what those two gentlemen do is they either find data sets that are pre-existing, or I supply them with data sets. So when we are working with landscapes and we're doing digital design, instead of just walking on a property and ground truthing everything in that moment. Ground truthing is basically verifying what is in the data on the ground. So data is a great place to start. Research is a great place to start, but everything has to happen in situ as you're on a landscape, because the map is not the territory. The map is just a representation at some granularity of accuracy, usually moving towards the inaccurate scale on a number of factors. But the more accurate, the more potential there is to get a higher degree of resolution of a design. That said, sometimes you can have data that's too accurate. I've seen people produce half-meter or foot contour for a site that's thousands of acres large, and it's just the resolution's too much. The brain overloads. You can barely even see it, so you have to dial that back to 5 meters or 20 feet or whatever. So I say that because you're going to find a lot of data out there, and it's important to be able to parse the signal from the noise of all of this data. So the way I use it is I tend to find those elements, I bring them into Google Earth Pro or sometimes QGIS, and then I start to create layers within Google Earth Pro so I can get a sense of what all of that is. If I don't have the topographical information that I need, I will sometimes survey the land myself. And there's a couple ways to do this. If the land is without canopy, that means there's no trees on it, and generally you can see ground. You can run a photogrammetry drone survey. I'm just going to check. I'm hearing some noise on the background. I just want to make sure I've muted everybody. Sergey, I'm going to mute you. You can run a drone with a third-party application. The ones I have used is Drone Deploy and Maps Made Easy. And basically they fly overhead, they know where they are fixed in the air, and then through some really great trigonometry, they work a process called photogrammetry, and they can create an accurate topographical digital elevation model, DEM, of the landscape. It's kind of like taking a thin silk sheet and draping it across the landscape. So you get this incredible data point cloud of this landscape. And from there, you can run a number of analyses off that landscape. And so generally, I let everyone know that I design large scale landscapes with is that I need high scale topographic information. And if we don't have it, I will have to survey it and create it. So sometimes I'll use a drone. If I don't have a drone, which kind of gets back to your GPS question, if I don't have a drone, depending on the accuracy of the design and all the rest of it, sometimes I'll survey it myself. And so I've rented what's called total stations. And these are GPS total stations that have a ground station and a roving stick. And they're usually RTK, which means real-time kinetics. So that means they're talking with the satellite constellations consistently. And what happens is when you set up the total ground station, it basically zeroes its point in respective to the Earth and respective to the mapping systems. And the longer you leave it to set, the higher the resolution. That means the smaller amount of error there is. So if you leave it for close to an hour, you can get down to sub-centimeter accuracy of where that total station is in the landscape. And then basically you take this roving stick and then you go along and you take all these points. And I was taught by a surveyor years ago that basically you're taking the apex of the curve, halfway down, and then the bottom of the curve. And if you take more points within that, the accuracy increases. So I worked on a landscape that was, I think, 175 acres, something like that, 175 acres, something like that. And basically had the drone go over top. And then I took points within the forest. And then Brent ended up marrying together those two data sets by way of, he's got a proprietary algorithm that once I had a sense of the height of the trees, he was able to subtract that from the drone and true that data with all the points that I had made in the landscape. Awesome, amazing, incredible way of getting a survey for less than the $5,000 or $6,000 that a survey company will give you for a legal survey. Because what I'm doing is not a legal survey. It's not a survey that's going to reference pre-existing points in the landscape. I'm basically just draping my own silk sheet over a landscape to get a sense of that topography. And then I can produce a number of different overlays. So I can produce a contour map at any interval I like. I can produce what's called a hill shade. I should show you guys some of this. This is the demonstration portion because I do have Google Earth up because I'm just resorting all my info. So I should show you the one that is giving me permission to do this. And we'll do probably Anderson. Okay. And layers. Flow accumulation is a good one. Okay, just give me a second as I switch over to the program. Okay, so let me make sure I've got this right. There we go. I'm going to stop share and reshare. So this is my Google Earth Pro workspace. And this property boundary, there it is. There we go. Give you some reference. This is a property I've been working on for a little while here. And so once I have that topographic information, which we were able to find by contacting local forestry outfit that had already run LiDAR over this section. You can see there's a lot of forestry that happens in and around this area in southern British Columbia. So once I was able to give that information over to Brent, Brent was able to run a number of overlays. And I get the overlays in two ways. I get them in a PDF form because I like to include them in my feasibility study that I give my clients, but also I've been moving towards giving folks basically a folder system. So basically I give my clients this folder system because it's a great way for us to communicate back and forth and a great way for them to actively use this data. So this is amazing. I love this as an overlay because this is what's called the catchment polyline. And so I've got a legend that shows me this, but basically these are all of the main flows that come onto and into a landscape. So basically it also traces all of the different tributaries and drainages within a landscape, and then how much comes into their property. And then each of these lines represents a period of flow. What's amazing about this as an overlay is that if I'm trying to design a pond and I know the volume of the pond, I can determine if I can fill that pond. This is the due diligence that we do in regenerative land design. The hill shade is a great one for those that don't read contour lines. The hill shade is amazing, and because of what Google Earth can do, you can move yourself around in the landscape and really kind of see how this landscape drains and sheds water. We work with a slope degree and a slope percentage. You can see the legend up here. Slope degree and slope percentage is important if you're going to be working in large scale agriculture, because tractors and other elements work at different degrees of slope. So some activities are good for some degrees of slope, other activities are for others. And because there's no unified system to use degree or percentages, I always get them in both, because you'll find if you're working with different contractors installing a landscape, they'll talk in different conversations. We won't use that one. This is kind of a fun one. This is called total wetness indicator. And so basically it's just showing how much water is coming into and through that landscape. Radiation is a good one as well. So this is watts per meter squared. So you can get a sense of what are the really hot areas. This is very much akin to what's called aspect, which is what is the direction that each of these different slopes are facing. So one's north, one's east, one's south, one west. I also have soil polygons, so the different types of soil types that are in here, which pops up and can give me exactly what's in that soil layer. That is if this data is existing. So if you don't have this data in your area, then it won't be existing, and all data is different. But I'll give you an example here of why I say that some data can be confusing. So this is a 50 centimeter, and it's taking a moment to load. Here we go. So this really shows why there's, you can have too much data. So generally, you're going to have to get very close for this to make any sense. And once you get into landscape, you could slowly start to see the different lines. On the other side of this, it's going to take a moment. We'll take, what's the one thing I want to show you here? Yeah, here's another one. So this is 5. And this is 5 meter versus 50 centimeter. And so this gives us a really good sense of the different areas in this landscape. So from here, I can start to make my different design conversations by drawing polygons and shapes and different elements here. So I can start to take a look at what are the proposed forest areas, what are some building areas that might be put in, what are the different yards and perimeters and corrals and fences and sub fences and things like that. So there's a fair bit of information I can start to load in here. And once I get the design wireframed out, then if I want to, I can go into the rendering portion of that. But really just placement is so much of what we do. And then from here, you can either design in something like Google Earth Pro. And years ago, I stopped providing big renders that were, 3-dimensional and Blender renders. And I'll bring up this other one that was beautiful, was very beautiful, but really so many of your clients are not going to want to pay for beautiful renders unless they have to have a board or they're applying for money or something like that. So these renders while beautiful, they take a lot of time and money, and they're quite expensive. And they're great because, you know, for anybody who's having problems visualizing like a plan, you can have a really incredible design conversation. These folks were having a number of water problems, and so they brought me on to do a water design for their landscape. So I sent up the drone, took a photo that was at this angle, and then sent it to a 3D renderer with my design and my design process. And then they put together a 3D render of the different elements at a level approaching photorealism. If you look at it long enough, you can see that it's not the case. But this can be that level of design render that you give folks if they want it. You know, it's one of those things that they don't need. And then I'm going to bring up a rendered. There we go. This one. This big. Punch in. This is a very long and thin property, so it can be problematic in terms of showcasing in something like Zoom. So I'll share this again. These are great clients. So this is, you know, at the end of a feasibility study, I'll do a concept design. And so we have a number of different elements here. Those numbers are labeled and then provided with a title. And then we took this overshot, and each of these were different elements that were being designed into the element. Basically, we had a grazing run that they could shunt their chickens out of their coop. They could put up a quick electrical fence and have them graze. A duck pond. They wanted to run some sheep in here. And so we basically had these alleyways and then these different fencing areas that we could put in. There was no way to put the greenhouse lower down on the slope due to solar constraints and due to slope. But they did have this nice open area that we could put in there as well. So, you know, this can also help with GIS because this could all be done and was done in a geo-reference program that my renderer, who I was working with at the time, was doing. So this is another way of working with, you know, final renders. But, and this is the point I want everyone to take away, you can spend a lot of time making things look beautiful and pretty, but if they're not functionally sound, which really is just lines and circles, does this make sense here? Thinking it through. A colleague of mine likes to say that that the work that we do is the chewing of the cud, right? It's the cow going back and chewing its cud and bringing it back up and chewing it again, so that way you get milk. We do a lot of thinking and rethinking in this work. Like, well, if it's here, but the soil's like this and the sun's like this, and people never visit this space, it probably doesn't make any sense. Bill Mollison called us future time scouts. We were always looking to the future. What will this turn into? What will the shade of this tree create? And it really is an exercise in probably one of the most holistic systems thinking approaches that I've found, regenerative land design and permaculture in particular. So that's how I use GIS and incorporate it, and that's my workflow. Robin, does that answer your question? Was there any follow-up questions before I move on to your next one?
Yeah, I'm curious at the hydrological data set. That sounds quite useful to see how water's flowing from outside of the property in.
Yeah, so that's the topographical information that if you can find that's accurate, you then run through a QGIS process that will then produce that as a final. And I'm happy to give anybody who wants them, Brent and having a moment here, Brent and Ryan's information if you want to produce that, or if you want to, you know, spend the time and looking up how to do that in QGIS. There's a number of folks who are teaching this on YouTube that you can kind of search through. Ryan and I are in the preliminary stages about talking about creating a QGIS course specifically for regenerative land design. And then the agrarians.org, they have a QGIS course taught by Georgy Pavlov, who's their main designer. So there's options to learn about how to do that as a process if you're looking to figure out the how of it.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And I like what you said about the circles and lines, because I feel like it's kind of like if I'm designing something, if I'm focusing on aesthetics, it's harder to make iterations very quickly and just like redraw and redraw and redraw.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I think with Google Slides it's so great, because it's just click and drag, right? You have a shape, you move it a little bit, doesn't make sense there, maybe not, maybe I need to do a cross section to figure out, you do a quick cross section, really focusing on not making it arduous for reiteration. And this is one of the reasons why I worked with paper and pencil for so long. And why an architect mentor of mine called tracing paper bumwad, because you were supposed to use a lot of it. You know, you were supposed to go through it very quickly and create all these drawings and, excuse me, create all these drawings and think about it and do it again. And the other thing I was taught early on was, we called them 4-ups, 6-ups, or 8-ups. And so basically you would take your entire landscape, like your base map, put it to grayscale, put it at about 30% opacity, and then print like 4 or 6 or 8 onto an 8x11 sheet. And then you could do these quick drawings very quickly. You know, you could have all of these little properties that you could then draw again and draw a third time and draw a fourth time and think about it. And that was amazingly useful when I learned that, because I was still working at, I had this, I was taught by somebody who I don't think they actually designed. And so they had these big clipboards. They were like 3 feet by 2 feet, and their pages were that big. And they drew, and they were all about the majesty and the romanticism of drawing and creating, and, you know, always using your elbow, always use your elbow. But after you finish one design, it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours later, and you're like, I have to do this all again. And so when somebody, and it seems like a simple thing, but when somebody showed me how to shrink down design and just be like little tiny drawing, like little Post-it note drawings almost, that dramatically increased my iteration rendering. So I could go, okay, well, what if this happened? And what if that happened? Oh, that's a good idea. I'll carry that to the next one. But then they're like 5-minute sketches. They're quick. So generally I get all the data into Google Earth. And then from there, I basically start making sketches as quickly as possible, because the longer my brain is working on the design, the longer my subconscious can work on it. There's a whole conversation we could have about dream design and how so many ideas have come to me in dreams. I wake up and I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense, and I'm putting into it. So I just find the transit time in my subconscious, mentally, emotionally, it allows me to come and progress on that design a lot quicker. So yeah, I really like that. And that's one of the reasons why I moved to digital drawing, because I never had to, I never had to work with another, you know, I didn't have to access the paper and then access the pencils and the pens. And, you know, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. And that's why I've been so happy with something like Morpholio Trace as my design application on iOS. And for those that work Android, I don't know of a good alternative. They keep talking about Morpholio Trace coming to iOS or to Android, but a lot of folks have used something like Affinity Designer because it's cheap. It's basically a knockoff of Adobe. It's a one-time cost. Problem is it doesn't georeference. And at this point in my design career, I want something that georeference. I want something that can give me coordinates that when I go back to the landscape, I can reference and start to ground truth. You've picked probably my favorite subject to talk about outside of soil and water. So I'm gonna have to be conscientious about how much I ramble. We were thinking of taking pictures and identifying local plants combined with coordinates to put on a map of a property. Yeah, great idea. Great idea. So again, for those applications for iOS, it's called GPS Kit, and it's a GIS GPS application. You can take photos, you can take notes, and the best part about it is you can import those photos and notes directly into Google Earth Pro. So if you were noticing on my Google Earth Pro application, I have an entire folder called Site Visits. And this is for me and for the clients to take photos and start to compilate that together, which has been really important and really fantastic for us to hold a design conversation together, because the more you can partner with your clients as being designers, the greater likelihood that they will be successful in their design process and successful in their management process, because you're bringing them along with you. You're educating them as you go, and they're educating you. What is the highest level accuracy GPS for the best price? Oh, that's such a loaded question. Brent years ago put me onto this marine GPS that you could find on eBay for like 20, 30 bucks. And you could leave in one spot. And if you left in one spot for like an hour and then did post-processing, you could get that one GPS spot down to sub-centimeter, which hopefully gives you the next portion of this equation, which is not just accuracy and price, but time. So at some point, your time has value. And the amount of time you spend collecting data can be immense. Because when I started that process with Brent's GPS, it would sit there and sit there and sit there. And I'd be sitting there going, yeah, I'm getting super accurate information, but I don't need that to do a watershed. I can use the publicly accessible data from the shuttle radar and topographic mission in 2000, which basically had a pixel at 30 meters. That also means that if your elevation is sub 30 meters, it's interpolating, it's guessing what it is, which is why the data that are in the contour map generators, both the paid and the unpaid, is pretty terrible. if there's large topographical changes, it's pretty terrible. And the fact that the one makes you pay for it is incredible. So you really want to have that trade-off. So I have resisted buying a high accuracy GPS that is Bluetooth enabled to my phone for years. And this week, you caught me on a good moment. This week I'm buying it. It's called a Bad Elf Surveyor. And this will bring down my accuracy to, I think, sub 10 centimeters generally, and works kind of wherever you are. And I think at last check, I think it was somewhere in the 300 USD mark, somewhere around there. But I have resisted for a long time because, you know, generally you can just find good data. And I've taken a look at some of the Garmin products that are Bluetooth enabled, but at this point in my career, and because I'm going more and more and more remote in my designs, I need to have something that's quite accurate so I can place mark. The Reach Reach products, there's both a ground station and a rover, and they've come down in price. They're a couple thousand, which of course will increase your accuracy. But, you know, generally that's been my process. If it's open canopy, I'll run the drone, I'll put in ground points, and I'll get those ground points as high accuracy as possible. If there's already high accuracy data, which is why I have that tutorial that goes into depth about searching for data, because if you can find the data, even if you pay, you know, $500 or $600 or $800 on a design, it's well worth time and effort. And I had to learn those lessons the hard way, because it's how I'm wired. I need to go through the whole process and figure it out for myself. So, and then if you're on Android, the comparable GPS kit is Gaia GPS, which is not as good as GPS kit, which is one of the reasons why I now take my iPad into the field with GPS kit, because it's just such an easier application to use. And Gaia's workflow, data transfer flow it's not terrible, but it takes time. And again, it's a time conversation. Probably Bad Elf Surveyor. That's probably my answer for what's the highest level of accuracy. Can you make accurate topographical maps from scratch or in areas where higher details are required? Yeah, so I think I've gone into that in detail. If you are on a residential landscape, don't do what I did, which was I took the highest point of the landscape, made a string line, created like a tower of wood, made sure that string line was level, and then took data points that came down, kind of like cross-sectioning the entire landscape. The urban landscape doesn't require a highly detailed map. It just doesn't. You know, if you can walk the landscape and generally see the flow and generally see, you know, the change in landscape, that's fine. Sometimes my fastidiousness, which I'm sure I've got some German in my ancestry, because I can be very, very specific on the details, but it just doesn't matter. You know, if you can generally see the landscape and generally see how it moves, great. Brad Lancaster, I was working with him for a while, and he taught me this really interesting trick. Our eyes, over the time period of us living, start to iron out the details of a landscape, because if we always saw the undulations, it would throw off our balance. And so he taught me this thing: if you're ever trying to figure out, you know, which way a landscape slopes, invert yourself as you're standing, you know, hinge at the hips and look through your legs and it's immediate. You can see very, very slight discernible slopes. It's the weirdest thing. It's very fun to teach in person because you get a whole bunch of people who are looking through their legs, and it's it's a very teachable moment, but it's very, very fun. But that's a neat way to play it as well, just to start to see that. How else have I made maps? Oh, there's another way of making a map. So if you have a transit, which is how we were making maps up until the advent of GPS. A transit is basically, it's a site level, but it has a center line and it has what's called statier lines. I think I talk about this in the tutorial. And basically the person on the other end who's holding what's called the storyboard, or the large measuring stick, you can get both direction, so a degree of direction on a compass rose, but you can also get distance. Basically, it's the top statier minus the bottom statier. And so what you're doing in real time is you're getting all those data points. And then you can freehand that on a map, and you can basically interpolate the lines or give it to a computer to interpolate as well. That's also a lot of work. And we did that on a remote island called Reed Island in BC. We got picked up by a boat and went out there and a landscape and took all the points of this landscape. They failed to tell us that they had just logged it. And so we were hiking over slash that was sometimes 10 feet and 8 feet and trying to find ground. So that's a lot of work as well. Different methods I think I've talked about. Cost, I don't know if I've really delved into that. So again, spending the time to find good data is so worth it, because the labor cost and the opportunity cost you lose in thinking about the data, which is what we're being hired to do. We're being hired to think about the different elements, those 3 circles we talked about last time. So inherent characteristics of a landscape, regulations, and then client needs and wants. That centers that sweet spot. That's what we're being hired to work on and understand and do. So the more time we spend acquiring data, the less time we're spent thinking about it. However, the more time you're on the landscape, the better, just generally. So kind of have to balance those things. So what's the most I've ever paid for data? I think I paid about $850 once for a whole data set. Some countries like Alberta, or some areas like Alberta in Canada, they have what's called, I think it's Vault Atlas. And because it's an oil and gas province, the whole province has been LiDAR'd, and you can pay, I think it's $500 for a section, which is 640 acres, which again is relatively cheap for what we're trying to do. And again, being aware of those costs is important, because if you come to a client and they hire you for design and you don't disclose costs because you don't know you need those costs to be disclosed, that can be important. So survey is something I price out of my contract. I always say survey could be anywhere from free if we find that data. If my GIS contractor can find that data, it can be free. Or if I have to come and survey, it could be somewhere in the range of like $3,000 to $5,000, because it's time and processing and equipment and all the rest of it. The drones, if you want to get into them, are relatively inexpensive for what they do, and you don't need the latest and greatest. So the original Mavic is fine. The Phantom 4 is fine. These are all DJI products. I haven't used any others because most of the third-party applications for drone mapping are really geared towards DJI, because they made the API kits so freely available. So yeah, so you can cost your drone for about $1,000 used. I would never buy it new. And then depending on where you live, there's the piloting costs and all the rest of it. So in some situations, in India, for example, you can't be an out-of-country drone pilot. You can't operate a drone if you're not an Indian national. So sometimes you just hire somebody to run the landscape. And then post-processing depends. Like Maps Made Easy can be as cheap as $50. Drone Deploy can be very expensive, but its accuracy is higher. And generally, the Brent Smiths and the Ryan Andersons of the world are, $150 to $350, depending on the complexity of the design. So yeah, it's a variable question, always dependent upon what data set you're looking for and all the rest of it. And I know I've said it once and I'll say it again. Searching for data so worth it every single time. Not to mention, you just get a sense of like, oh, there's a mining company here, I'm going to call them, and oh, there's this. And generally, if you're talking about that, you're working in regenerative design, you find a lot of like-minded people who want to help you, and that's been super fun. I'm talking to miners who have been wanting to get out of the game for years, and they love what you're doing, and they saw Biggest Little Farm, and you know, there's a beautiful connection that can happen there. Costs. Okay, Robin. Your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. Did we answer your 6 questions? Oh, double thumbs up. Good. Great. Awesome, man. Umesh, Javan, you had mentioned the Quivira Erosion guide in your feedback on my assignment. Would you be kind enough to explain it a bit and how it might help me mitigate the erosional features of my design site? I would be happy to, Umesh. So I'm just going to bring up the Quivira, and I think it's just erosion control guide. Yes, it is in my repository of grand information. So this is the erosion control field guide put up by the Quivira Coalition, created by Craig Sponholtz. If you don't know Craig's work, highly recommend it. Water artisan, really incredible. And basically what this erosion control field guide does is takes a look at normally arid environments and how to create a number of different features that can then either spread or condense water flow. And elements, or pardon me, projects like the Albaida project in Saudi Arabia with my friend and colleague Neil Spackman are a great example of using these, as are a couple of videos that I'll show you in a moment. So basically, these are very simple structures that pacify water, and in pacifying water, they remove the erosional potential of that water. And when water can drop out, especially when it picks up sedimentation, as soon as it slows, it drops that sedimentation. And we have 3 different elements within soil texture that are abiotic, that's non-living. We have sand, silt, and clay. And then we have all the organics, which are the seeds and vegetative matter and feces, you know, all of that drops, which is basically fertility. So this is what's called a one rock dam. And there's kind of 2 opportunities that you can orient them. You can orient them flat like this, and you do what's called a key stone. And so you dig a trench and you key in those stones, and then you place stones above them. And so it's a 1 rock dam because it's 1 rock high. And basically it can serve as a pacification. So if water comes in, it'll pacify, and over time, it'll create a depositional layer, a sediment layer behind it, and you can increase this. So if there are areas that are washing out, this can be a simple way to start to revegetate. The 2 other things you could do with this is you can seed in the area below or above, and then you can orient them also in book stacks. So you can basically stack them on end, and it's very strong structure. So if you have a larger flow with more velocity, it can be very useful. And in creek, these are used in areas just after the cut bank to basically create these depositional layers. And then you basically put them up and into you go from convex to concave, or from convex to concave, because basically they'll armor. If you just do it in the low spots, you'll get erosion on these 2 sides here. Hold on, let me just pull out my marker. Yeah, so you'll erode here, which is problematic. The next is what's called a rock mulch rundown. And so this is when you get what's called a head cut. So basically, if there's water that's been coming in and cutting out this element of soil, or this element of parent soil, it's an opportunity to regrade and then use one of those 1 rock dams all the way up. But again, it's only to be used in low head cuts, low energy head cuts, not in channel head cuts. A Zuni bowl is kind of like a big plunge pool that's totally armored. So you can see here in this design, and I'll show you a couple of real life examples in a moment. Media Luna, tips up, tips down, is a way to collect water or spread water. It's a great opportunity to again use something like a 1 rock dam to collect and to spread. And some great examples here of what they look like in situ and how they change over time. I recently hosted a course with Neil Bertrando and Jeffrey Adams, which was just phenomenal. I was so incredibly inspired and impressed by their work. And they have taken a lot of these concepts and created low-tech erosion control. They wrote an amazing book called How to Save the World with Sticks and Stones, or at least your watershed, and created this process that goes through this idea of low-tech erosion control. And so we've got this course, it's a self-paced course you can go through, but we did a number of case studies. And so I would say, look through all these case studies. This upland beaver dam was amazing. This was a run out. This is a number of like Zuni bowls and one rock dams. They use big logs as well in place of those one rock dams. And then there's this amazing process that Neil introduced me to, which I'd never seen before, called vertical fish scale straw mulch. And so basically when you get a bale of straw or hay, it comes in these flakes. And this was such an easy way to do this. Basically, you take a shovel, stick it down to the top of the head of the shovel, open, and you basically just stick that straw mulch in. And when you pull out the shovel, you compress it back in. And what's amazing is basically this acts as almost a screen. So if you have sedimentary erosion, it basically hits that and drops out behind with very little effort put in. But yeah, I would highly recommend looking through all of these videos. And again, that's on regenerativeliving.online. And just look for the low-tech erosion control. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just take this URL and I'll pop it into our chat. And I also put it into the document there. So it's in the chat, and I'm going to put it into the document right below your question. Awesome. Next question. You also mentioned that the surface runoff dehydrates the landscape, which might be the cause at my site design. Yeah. And I think, oh, there's the link. Awesome. So looking at your landscape, Umesh, and yeah, you are here. Umesh, help me pronounce your name right. Having a weird name and wanting to pronounce it right for me is always a thing for others.
Yeah, it's Umesh.
Umesh. Okay, wonderful. So I'm just going to share my screen and we're going to pull up your design here. So your site photos is what kind of made me think that you might be dealing with overland flow. It's going to take a moment. I need to do this again. Okay, here we go. And you can already see there's a number of water harvesting strategies that are already being employed around you. A lot of contour farming. This one, maybe, here we go. So we're seeing in some areas, I think, is this vegetation here or is this rock?
These are just bushes and shrubs.
Bushes and shrubs, yeah. So what I'm seeing here in the bushes and shrubs is something called pedestaling. And basically what it is when water is flowing around the vegetation, it'll tend to erode out the area around the vegetation. And so you get the sort of pedestaling that happens. And so that was one of the things that clued me in that there's probably, if I didn't know your climate, I would say that there's probably big deluges, big rain events, or even monsoons in this area. And also just taking a look at the dirt path, you generally see some runoff areas, things like this. So this lets me know that there's quite a bit of water at some point in this landscape that's running off. So when we're reading a landscape, we're starting to see these indicators that there's quite a bit of this water that's running off, which to me says I would start to think about water first in terms of your design site, starting at the top of the watershed, and we'll get to that within the water assignment. You'll get a sense of your whole site. And then slowly working down, how do we create almost like a prison for water on the site so that not a drop can exit the site without having at least a little bit of transit time, slow down, sink in, and then maybe put to productive use in vegetation. So that was how I was reading your landscape. Okay. Any follow-up questions, Umesh?
No, I don't think so. Actually, as we're going to work through it, we'll see how it works out.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you.
Tim. Yeah, you're welcome. Tim, I mentioned the walnut tree in my canvas, and you agreed that the juglones that come out of the roots could be a problem. I wanted to know what your experience is with walnut trees and what your suggestion is. A quick Google search told me that some fruit trees don't tolerate and others tolerate it and others don't. Okay, great. So Tim, actually, we just had this question in my other class. So if you ever want to take a look at this, you just go to previous office hours, and then I've listed out all of the different conversations I've had. So this was very, very, very recent. This was the 7 out of 10. So if you want to take a look at this, we talk about juglones in this conversation, and there'll be a link in there that'll tell you where it is. But I will go through this again with you. But if I miss anything here, I've probably said it there. So for everybody else that doesn't know, walnuts produce a allelopathic exudate from the roots called juglone. And juglone is allelopathic. That means detrimental to other vegetation. And you can see this because generally around the base of a walnut, there's not a lot of other plants and trees that are growing. So first and foremost, the plant database, which you can start to see on assignment 19. There's information on the left-hand side of the slide. So I'll just pop down there. 19, look at that. So good. And there we go. So 125. So this is the natural plant database. This is a great resource, just phenomenal resource for different elements within plant research and design. So you can go there and you can research all the different plants that work well with juglones. Generally, I will work with the ribes family, so currants, and then all of the savory herbs. So your thymes, your oregano, your rosemaries, that whole family. They work really well. I just had a student in that last class, and you'll see it if you watch the video, say that pawpaws work really well under walnuts, which is great. But that's been my experience. So I would go through the natural capital plant database, and then I would read through that or watch that section of that office hour. Any follow-up questions there?
No follow-up.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Daliborka, how can we present on the base map the buildings facilities that are under trees and actually not visible from aerial view? Should I make overlap of buildings and trees on map? Example to slide. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about this. So remember, just a remembrance to everyone, like we have up here. When you do give me your name and your location, make sure to link to your project all the time, because chances are there's always going to be a question there. So here we go. Right. So there's some canopy issues. Yeah. Let's see what you've done on your base map. Maybe. Okay. No. All right. So generally, there's a couple ways of doing this. If you can't see it, so we've got 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Usually what I'll do in a base map situation is I will draw them in as you have, but I'll draw them with my full markings, and I use an orange lined light gray interior for all of my buildings. Just so I have a visual language I always come to, and I don't have to think about it. Now, let's say you can't see them from space and you don't know where they are in space as well. So one of the ways you can do this is you can either take a compass bearing and do that whole process, which, generally has a fair amount of intelligence or experience that you need to have to do something like that, which can be problematic. Or, which is the way I've always done this because it's just easy and accurate. You can see if this is too big. No, it's okay. Let me just pop down. Or you can basically from this corner to this corner measure, and from this corner to this corner measure. And so let's say that this is, you are, where are you again in the world? In Serbia? Is that right? Hold on, give me a sec.
Yes, in Serbia.
Serbia. Okay, so you're
Sorry
probably
for my camera, I cannot make it work with Zoom.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah,
you're working
in Serbia, you can see the aerial view is really blurry and really bad. This is the best what I could find
totally
through the whole history, and I really have troubles, making a base map with this.
Yeah, fair enough. So what you can do is if you have a few known points, it looks like this building is generally known. And if on the property, you get a sense of, you know, what's, let's say, the sizing from this to this. So you have 6 meters here and 10 meters here. You can then bring it into a program that if you know the length of, let's say, this building, and let's say this building is, let's just say 10 meters for sake of argument, then you can actually just use your scale bar almost as a ruler and move it around, and you can place the other elements. And so in real time, you're there and you take 2 known and fixed positions, and you get a sense of what the 2 distances are, and this creates a triangulation. And from there, you can then take this back here, and you could maybe I'll do this on the template because I have access to it and I can muck about with it without doing too much. So what you could do is you could take it to the base map, and we'll just use this as an example, and I'll copy this as a slide and delete it afterwards. Okay, cool. So let's say we took a screenshot of this area. Okay. And then let's say we brought it in here. Great. And then let's say we went out into the property and we figured out what it is, and we've got our scale bar here. We can literally take our scale bar as long as it's in front. So going to order, bring to front. So we can literally bring our scale bar and use it as a ruler to then place what our next element will be. So we can, you know, if we know it's 10, then we know that, you know, this building's got to be here, and we know its dimensions. And so we can do it that way to actually bring those buildings into the digital space or into our base map. And then we've got an accurate base map. And we could do that for everything, actually. If we have a good sense of where the tree trunks are so let's say this is our tree, but we know the trunk is here because we've done this process again, where we've gone from, you know, maybe this point. Oh, sorry. It's not the one I wanted. Maybe let's say this point and this point, or let's say this point, this point, and this point, then we can actually place it in space. And then from the trunk, if you basically run a tape measure from the trunk to the canopy, you can then get a sense of what the canopy size is, and you can place it onto your base map. This is how I used to make base maps exclusively, because the Google imagery was always like this. It was always super rough and brutal and not very good. And so I always had to go and take a physical map like I had here. I usually print it at like 30 or 20% opacity in grayscale. And then I would basically trace out and draw all the buildings on it. And then I would put all the dimensions. So I'd put like, I would put like 10 meters here, and I would put like 4 meters here on this little base map, and 4 meters here. And let's say this looks like maybe 6 meters here. And then bring that into my whatever program I was using at the time, or at that time I was making base maps by hand. And so I had this little element that had all these markings, all these measurements, and then I would bring it into a scale. And I used to use a scale ruler. And then I would just draw the map through a scale ruler conversation. And so this is what I would do digitally if I was you, if I wanted to place anything specifically on this map that wasn't clear. Any questions about that?
Clear. So we are back to the basic math. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
And,
No big.
Yeah. And another question.
Yeah.
How to present on a base map building under the tree? Because I have quite a big trees on my property, pretty old. Some are older than 50, 60 years.
Right.
So yeah, all those smaller buildings are actually under those trees.
Totally. So same thing. So once I had a sense about where they were physically in space, I would do the same thing. And I don't know if I have exactly, I kind of do. So I'll show you just usually what I do. And I don't think I can rotate these in this conversation. No, I should probably just do this actually in the program. So what I would do is I would take my square shape and I would make sure it's generally right. Something like this. And then again, my coloration scale is that on that. And then I like an internal color that's a little gray, but transparent. Great. And then I want this a little thicker. Yeah, there we go. Cool. And so here's, let's say here's my building, and it's not perfect. And that German heritage is starting to make itself known. So I usually put it right on the end, and then I'm just going to pull it out. And remember, the closer you go into this landscape, or pardon me, into this image, the more granularity you can get. That's pretty good. Okay, so let's say I have that. Now I've got to put trees over top. So generally what I'll do is I'll lighten the trees. So I'll bring in a circle. I don't know if this is right, but this, let's say this one goes here, like so. So usually doing a dark green border for conifers, and then a super light internal. Oh, it's not working. Where's my custom? There we go. Then a green, and then a super light green and very transparent, almost like totally transparent. So I would do that, and then I would take a little mark, and that would be another little circle. I can draw it nice. For the canopy, obviously this isn't the case because the trunk wouldn't be right there. So let's just move this all over to make this a bit more realistic. And then I usually do a green for the trunk as well. So fill color, grab a dark green. Oop, grab the wrong one. There we go. Just this one. Ah, perfect. So this is how I would do it. I would have a very light canopy transparency. And then of course, with this, you would then take this whole thing, you'd go over to your legend. Of course, I already made this. I already have this already finished. So you could take this conifer instead of drawing it as I did. And then you could bring this over. So I could paste this, copy and paste this, bring this over. Because I'm so punched in, I've got to slowly move it over here. And then hold shift, and then it'll still be a circle. And I'm just going to put that a little bit like this. And because this is a little bit too opaque, I'm just going to change its coloration. Oh, I got the wrong one. There we go. Click on the coloration there. Why it comes up as red? Weird. Go here, and then go super light. Nice. There we go. And now I can take this whole thing together once I group it, clicking both of them, right click. Oh, I wonder why it says ungroup. I want them grouped. This one and this one. There we go. Group. Very interesting. I think this is probably behind it. So I'm going to right click on this, order. There we go. And then put that where it needs to be. And then I already have that symbol over here, so it's very easy for me to read. And of course, you would do all of this without the aerial in the background eventually. So just make sure the aerial is its separate layer, as I talk about in the tutorial, so you can remove it. So that way, when this is all done, you end up with something like this, copy, and we'll just put it here for a quick second, because then that would be on a white background and you could see everything. Does that make sense, Deliboka?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Hi, you're welcome. And because this is a live template, I'm going to delete this slide because I made it new. Perfect. Great. Let's go back to the question and see if there's anything else. Oh, there isn't. Awesome. Only 10 minutes over. That's pretty good. All right, folks. Any follow-up questions? Anything that's burning for folks that popped up while we were chatting that you want to just bring up?
Yeah. Hi, Javan.
Hi.
Yeah. What point are we going to need to be on site?
At what point will you need to be on site? Yeah, good question. So first and foremost, I'll just point to the tutorial that goes through this. So that way you make sure it's clear. So there's this little piece on the end here says, for those in temperate to polar conditions, you may want to look ahead for being on site. So there's that video where I go into it, but I can go over it again. So generally you want to start to be on site. Usually for the sector compass, it's useful if you don't have that data. Microclimates is usually useful to be on site because you may be doing summer and winter microclimates and you're only going to be in one season. Zones in particular, because you'll be taking a look at traffic flows. So if you're in a place that gets winter, you can actually look on the ground and see what kind of traffic flows are happening. If you're not in a place, then that may be useful. Water, you may need to be on site just to measure different roofs and things of that nature, but you can usually do that digitally. Soil, you absolutely need to be on site because you'll be taking soil samples. Local ecology, you may want to be on site to start to ID plants. You may need to be on site for site cross-section because you'll need to be taking measurements. Local plant survey as well. Plant design, it's usually good to go on site and just kind of see things as they're laid out. Building survey, no. Zone 1, it can be useful. And concept plan can be useful.
I say that the first mandatory being on site is the soil.
Yeah, I would say so. Yep. And for those that are in cold climates and the ground is still frozen, generally it's just grabbing soil from anywhere you can and testing it and using it as if it is the soil test on site. So basically showing that you understand the concepts, and you could do it without supervision later on at a time you need it. But yeah, soil would be the first. Any other questions? Questions, comments, queries, quotations? Okay. Well, how was our office hours today? Are people taking away something of value?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was very, very good. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. All right, folks, we should be back to regularly scheduled marking. Thanks again for everybody's patience. If you got a feedback from me where there were some marks missing, you can resubmit. Basically, just make sure you say, hey, Javan, I fixed this, this, and this on these slides. So make it very specific, because I'll go right to that and I'll remark it. For those of you that are submitting early, that's fantastic. I should be back on marking early assignments as of this week. Don't forget to have fun with it, because it'll make it a lot more easier if you're enjoying the process and enjoying the conversations and reaching out to each other and reaching out to me, and have a good time with it. It's a fair amount of fun to learn how to be conscientious within the world in a practical sense. There's a lot of impractical sense making that happens to send hearts and prayers to our environment and send hearts and prayers to our way of being on this planet. But permaculture is one of the tangible, real ways that we can live differently right from the get-go. And I am buoyed to know that there's a group of folks such as yourselves that are interested. So thanks very much. And we will see you in the next office hours, unless I hear from you at some point in the future. Thanks. You're so welcome.
Thank you.
Elias, you're welcome.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome, everyone. Take care.